Salam, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Popular Cradle. It's Rhiannon here with you. We have an episode today about legal accountability and what justice looks like after genocide. But I think before we go to the interview with Jake Romm from the Hind Rajab Foundation, it's important to frame our conversation with a rundown of where we are in Gaza, where we are in the state of the genocide, and what's happening in Palestine right now. We know, of course, that a ceasefire agreement, a so-called ceasefire agreement, has been reached, but we know also that in reality, minuscule amounts of aid have been allowed into Gaza. Israel is, of course, still bombing, still killing Palestinians. Israel is bombing Lebanon. And all the while, of course, things continue to escalate in the West Bank. Honestly, it feels like an understatement to say escalation because the widespread, commonplace incidents of settler violence, of Palestinian displacement in the West Bank is so acute. And just this week, we saw the passage of a United Nations security resolution that establishes the so-called Board of Peace and an international stabilization force to oversee governance in Gaza, which, of course, we know in reality means direct U.S. occupation of Gaza and a new colonial structure for Palestine. So it's hard to really call this a ceasefire, and ceasefire is complicated to talk about because obviously a reduction in mass destruction and mass killing, that's a good thing. But we also have to think about the ways that this so-called ceasefire serves Israel's interests and it serves the United States' interests. The genocide is ongoing, even though it has slowed down. And this quieter part doesn't mean that this genocidal settler colony can continue to exist with impunity. We have to make sure that the Zionist entity can't recover its image and continues to face isolation and consequences for this violence. So this brings me to these concepts of accountability, justice, what that can look like after genocide or during genocide.
Justice is inevitable, and our responsibility, even if we have the smallest of means, is to resist oppression everywhere.
So we had a conversation with Jake Romm, a legal representative of the Hind Rajab Foundation, at the People's Conference for Palestine. In this conversation, we talk about the work that the Hind Rajab Foundation is doing to pursue legal accountability on those who carried out and continue to carry out this genocide. We hope you enjoy the conversation. We hope you can check out the work that the Hind Rajab Foundation is doing. Let's turn it over to the interview. We are so delighted to be joined by Jake Romm from the Hind Rajab Foundation. We're at the People's Conference for Palestine, and Jake is speaking on a panel over the weekend, and we are thrilled that you are here giving us some of your time. Thanks for being with us, Jake.
Thank you so much for having me.
So maybe if we just jump into things, could you describe what is the Hind Rajab Foundation? What kind of work do you do?
Yeah, so the Hind Rajab Foundation was started by a group of activists and lawyers. I'll volunteer during the course of the genocide. And what we do is we bring offensive litigation against Israeli soldiers and officials around the world with the aim of having them prosecuted for their crimes in Gaza and arrested and thrown in prison. The way this works is, I would say we have three kind of tiers of operation. One being the sharing information with the International Criminal Court. One of the first things that the Hind Rajab Foundation did was to send a file of 1,000 names of IDF war criminals to the ICC. That is an important part of our work, but it's not really the main aspect of what we do. Two main aspects of what we do are bringing criminal complaints in national courts.
Okay.
And so that operates on two levels. The first one, which is, I think, mostly what we're known for, is work against what we call traveling soldiers. And so these are Israelis who are going on vacation. Oftentimes they do it between tours in Gaza to destinations that are very popular with Israel, particularly like South America, Southeast Asia, but of course they go all over the world. So we have an incredible team of researchers that tracks these guys. We know who they are. We know, what units they're in. We know where and when they were operating. And so we know the crimes that they committed as well. And this is all open source. Part of it is that they publish it themselves.
Right.
So when they post on their Instagram story, like, I'm going on vacation to Brazil, well, we have the file ready and we can give it to a Brazilian lawyer to bring to the prosecutor. And these cases are based on the principle of universal jurisdiction. So we have to act very quickly because jurisdiction only really obtains here while they're in the country.
Yeah, and jurisdiction would mean legally, like some kind of control over the person. Can I prosecute this person? Would be, does the prosecutor have jurisdiction? Does that court have jurisdiction?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so part of the reason we do this is, one, it's like the only way to go get these guys when they leave Israel. Two, it starts to create a kind of like global sense that they are not welcome, that they are being watched, and it freaks them out. The Israelis are like entirely not used to the idea of accountability at all. They're used to the opposite. They're used to impunity. They've enjoyed impunity for their actions since forever. They've been committing war crimes against humanity, and genocide against the Palestinian people since the beginning of the state of Israel, and not once have they been brought before a court. And so the mere fact of filing a case, of not even getting an arrest, but just filing the case, it shatters some kind of thing in their psyche. And, we've seen it have effects already where they will like turn their backs to the camera when they're taking official portraits. The state has felt compelled to issue guidelines about stop posting X, Y, or Z on social media, which of course we hope they keep posting on social media.
Right. More evidence.
And like, oh, here's primers of here's what to do if you find yourself in legal trouble. So, it's already having an effect, and it's resulted in some investigations and some arrests. People were let go, which is not what we want to see. But yeah, that is the kind of the splashiest aspect of our work. The less splashy, but I think probably more important aspect is building cases against dual nationals. Because there, if someone, say, is a national of Israel, but also of, I'll just keep using Brazil as an example, of Brazil, then Brazil always has jurisdiction. It doesn't matter if they're in the country because they're a national of that country. And so jurisdiction obtains on the principle of nationality. These cases, I think, are more important, one, because we can take our time and really build up the files, which of course the other files are good to go. They're prosecuting ready, or at least sufficient to have an investigation launched. But these can be much more robust. We can gather more evidence. We can work behind the scenes to kind of lay the political groundwork to make sure that these people will be detained and not allowed to leave the country, which has been a problem for us. Like in Brazil, we had a case that proceeded to, they were launching an investigation. The target got wind of this, and the Israeli government spirited him away to Argentina, and then from Argentina back to Israel, which is like a reverse rat line, reverse Nazi rat line, which should go, the historical irony is not lost there. And likewise in Belgium, we had two traveling soldiers who were an EDM music festival in Boom, Belgium, who were arrested after one of our complaints. They launched an investigation, and what we would have liked to have happened, and what they should have done, and what they were obligated to do, is to detain them in the country while the investigation is pending. Because when they leave, the jurisdiction leaves. The case is ongoing. Like, the case can be ongoing, but like, you're not going to be able to depose them. You're not going to be able to do discovery on their devices because they're gone, and they're certainly not coming back. Belgians instead kind of punted the case to the ICC, which on the one hand carries expressive content with it, recognizing after interrogating these guys that, it's worth looking into them for committing the most serious crimes under international law.
Right.
So that's a nice sign. And it's good that they justified the detention under the principle of universal jurisdiction in the first place. But states themselves have an obligation to do these prosecutions, and they can't keep punting it to international mechanisms, which move too slowly. And also, international law depends on states for its articulation and its enforcement. And so it's up to states to do it. And the other reason we really insist on doing these on the national level, which is also why the dual national work is so important, is it only works to create this climate of accountability if all of the states are doing it.
Right.
It's one thing for the UN to say, we don't like this. It's one thing for the ICC to say it. But the ICC also can only go after guys like Netanyahu and Gallant because they don't have the resources to get everyone. A culture of accountability can only replace the one of impunity if it is worldwide and if it is widespread, which means capturing the lowest level Israeli soldiers, who are the ones perpetrating the genocide on the ground. Netanyahu and Gallant may give the orders. They may be the architects of the genocide, but all of those orders need to be carried out by individuals, and all of those individuals are guilty as well. So that is what the work is about. It's about creating a very robust articulation of international law, but one that is happening on the national level, so that it can actually be enforced, and so that the Israelis feel the world becoming small for them.
Yeah. It's not only like for its enforcement, but also so that it's targeting the people doing genocide, the people who are doing war crimes. Is there a tension there? Because I feel like we learn in this international legal world order that was supposedly implemented after World War II. We sort of learn, like, maybe like coming out of the Nuremberg trials, that it's actually not the sort of like foot soldiers of genocide that are to be held accountable, but the military officers, the officials, the people making the calls and making the orders to do genocide.
Right.
So does the work being done at the Hind Rajab Foundation, do you see it as something that's happening where you're using existing law as a tool, or do you see it as something that's pushing international law, or like, changing that system?
We're certainly using the law as it's written and as it exists. And the law is like really, really clear. Like we have videos of guys blowing up homes with no one in them. And like, that is a war crime. That is to the Geneva Conventions, in the Hague Convention, it's in the Rome Statute. The law could not be clearer on this. And so in that sense, we're just articulating the law as it is and saying, now it's time to apply it. The way in which we're pushing the law, and again, from within the bounds of the law, we're not working for the creation of new law or new statutes or new treaties or anything like that, but is that universal jurisdiction is a long-standing principle in international law, but it's also somewhat of a dormant one. For people who may not know, universal jurisdiction is the idea that for certain crimes, they are so heinous or so against the idea of law itself that every authority in the world has the capacity and indeed the obligation to prosecute them. And this originally comes from, I believe, it's pirates were the original targets of it. Enemies of all mankind is what they were called, because they were like outside the law and they were operating against the idea of nations and comedy, et cetera. And then it was also applied to the Nazis. And, I think we're at a similar conjuncture of a post-World War II order, and it's time for it to come online in a serious way. And part of the reason that we really insist on that is, as you mentioned, like the Nuremberg trials, and we had the Nuremberg trials, and they targeted the most important guys. But the Nuremberg trials were coming from a position of a group of countries had just won a war, and now we're prosecuting the people that they had defeated in that war. And so they had not only the moral and legal authority to do it, but they also had the power, the backing of the rest of the world. And so they were able to institute an international tribunal and give that tribunal teeth, but those teeth came from the military might that they had just used to defeat their enemies. And this was the same thing in, say, Rwanda, the ICTR, and the trials for the former Yugoslavia. These are international mechanisms that sprung up after a regime was defeated to try the people of the former regime for their crimes. What's happening now is you have a regime in Israel that is not defeated and is indeed ascendant and is protected by the United States and the rest of the West, more or less. And so the idea that there will be an international tribunal as things currently stand, is just laughable, because those need to be authorized by the Security Council. And who sits on the Security Council?
With veto power.
So then, like, international law, as it was articulated in the ICTY and the ICTR and the Nuremberg tribunals, has become something of a dead letter. It's been used, as I said, against defeated regimes. It's been used by Western states against people from the global South, but it has not been used against anyone in the global North. And that doesn't mean that the law itself is bad, but it does mean that the ways in which it is enforced are indicative of a rotten world order in which countries like the United States can position themselves and their allies beyond law's reach. And if you start articulating law on the national level, and particularly against low-level soldiers, where questions that make states uneasy about head of state immunity things don't really come into play, then you can start giving international law teeth again. You start vindicating it as law instead of just as these aspirations that we get to bring online whenever a disfavored party. The promise of law is that it applies to everyone equally. And if you violate it, you will be held accountable. And that can only happen in a world order in which no country is beyond the reach of the law. And countries, particularly from the global South, who have always been the most robust defenders and authors of international law, because they see it as a way to protect themselves from the domination of the global North. These countries are starting to use universal jurisdiction, or at least that's what we're trying to push them to do. Which also, to be clear, we're trying to push all countries to do it, but it's been most receptive in the global South.
Right.
That is a way to advance the law towards actually being law, and not just a tool that can be employed every now and then.
Not just semantics, not just a cover for something else. Right, exactly. Okay, we're talking about accountability because I had a question coming in, which is like, what are the goals of this work? Is it like ending genocide? Is it like freeing Palestine? And I think there's something sort of more material or concrete coming out of what we're talking about, which is like, it's accountability for people who are committing crimes. And I think that's really kind of accessible for everybody to understand. And it's like, oh yeah, we have law for that. I wonder if you could get into like, what does accountability for something like genocide? Like, what does that look like?
So this is where we get into like whether the law is a good tool.
Right.
Because so the law will not bring accountability for genocide by itself. It can't. Because the way the law works is it establishes a formal equality between the parties, and it only addresses discrete disputes. You know, you have the guy who did the crime and you have the prosecutor against him, and they are formally equal before the law. And the result is either that guy is guilty of that discrete crime or he's not. And doing this in a very large scale fashion, I think it's a necessary part of what accountability looks like.
Yeah.
Not only because there needs to be justice for these crimes, and people need to be pinned to their deeds.
Yeah.
And putting them in prison or some other sanction is one of the ways in which you do that. But also, the law is a very powerful tool for creating a narrative and for establishing facts because of its, the robust like discovery processes, and putting the stories of the atrocities in the context of the expressive area of the law. Say, you did X, Y, and Z. That is like a great example. Cut myself off here. Destruction of civilian property.
Yeah.
That seems somewhat minor in the grand scheme of what's happening in Gaza, where, people are being sniped, and obviously like the loss of life is tremendous and staggering and much greater than we know. But what you can do with the law is say the destruction of human dwellings, that is also genocide.
Yeah.
You can take this thing that's the destruction of property and say, no, that is also the destruction of a people, because it creates conditions brought about in order to, I forget the actual wording of the statute.
Yeah.
Hostile to human life or to extinguish life. And not just now, but also in perpetuity in the strip, in terms of the toxicity that comes from so much rubble.
Right. Environmental destruction as well is genocide as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And by charging that crime as genocide and not just as a war crime, that helps to articulate a specific narrative of how the genocide works in a way that is very easily cognizable to people, especially in America, where people are a little bit allergic to structural thinking, but they're very litigious. And so they're very good at thinking of things in terms of, oh, that was a crime.
Yeah.
We got to do something about that.
Yeah.
And it's a way of kind of putting this in discrete terms that people can understand, but in aggregate. So that's what the law is good at. What it's bad at is it's bad at addressing the conditions that led us to this.
Yeah.
You cannot arrest someone for the crime of settler colonialism. You can arrest them for the crime of murder, which is a part of doing settler colonialism.
Yeah.
You can arrest them for the crime of forcible transfer, but you can't put someone on trial for settler colonialism. And you can win a case against a settler for stealing someone's home, and the relief can be you have to give that home back. But you can't bring a case against Zionism and say the relief is Israel is dismantled and the land is returned to its rightful owners.
Yeah.
You can't
It's not going to be in a court order. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just beyond the purview of the law.
Right.
And, going back to Nuremberg, we arrested a bunch of guys. Did we get rid of the conditions that led to Nazism? No.
Obviously not.
Obviously not. You're right.
Yeah.
In fact, we nurtured them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So the law is it's a part of the toolkit. It's a part of the toolkit like any other, and which also means that you don't pursue it just because it's the law, but it's a part of a broader movement.
Yeah.
And it needs to be wielded like a tool, which is to say, you use it where it's useful and you don't where it's not. You don't use a hammer where you need a screwdriver.
Yeah.
It's a part of the broader toolkit that can lead to liberation.
Yeah. Is there a connection? You've mentioned the ICC. Is there a connection between the work that Hind Rajab Foundation is doing and say like the South African case at the ICJ alleging that Israel is committing genocide? Like, how does this legal work fit together, if at all?
Yeah. So it very much fits together, which is that one of the ways that you can try to compel these states to undertake these prosecutions is they have their own domestic laws, but they also have international treaty obligations. So they have obligations to other states, which is what the ICJ is about, is states for states. And South Africa is suing Israel for violations of the Genocide Convention because they're both a state party. And so state parties can sue other state parties for that. And what this means is that you can now go to states and say, the ICJ issued provisional orders saying that there is a plausible risk that the Palestinian people will be subject to genocide or deprived of their rights not to be subject to genocide. Yeah. Which, of course, as we all know, the genocide is happening, and the ICJ case is proceeding very slowly and needs to be picked back up. But,
always this reactivity in the law. That's like this lagging thing. Yeah.
But you can go to states now and say, Israel's in violation of these provisional orders. You have affirmative obligations under the Genocide Convention to prosecute genocidaires within your borders under the Geneva Convention. Article 146 of the Fourth Geneva Convention places on states an affirmative obligation to seek out anyone who may have committed a grave breach of the conventions within their borders without regard to nationality. That is an obligation that every state in the world, more or less, has signed on to. It's customary international anyway, to exercise universal jurisdiction over war criminals. And so when you have these cases in like the ICC and the ICJ, those give like much greater persuasive power, even though we're doing prosecutions under domestic laws, because all these states have, even the United States has, incorporated like the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Convention, in some cases the Rome Statute, into their domestic criminal codes. We can use the international proceedings to say, you have an international obligation under these treaties and in relation to these cases to exercise your national court system to fulfill those obligations.
I have a question kind of about the evidence that you're amassing. This has been a live stream genocide. There's so much evidence uploaded to the internet every day. You said yourself, by IOF soldiers themselves, but there's still like this active disinformation campaign happening, discrediting campaign happening against all of that evidence. So how do you all like at HRF try to combat the misinformation, those lies, maybe see like the narrative power of something that confronts that misinformation? Yeah.
So what I can say about the research will be kind of limited because the research team is like anonymous. It's very siloed, and that's for the safety purposes. But the way my understanding of how it works and the process is it's open source. We have like kind of like incredible native software for like mapping and things like that. And basically what will happen is like an atrocity or a crime is committed. I mean, there's a constant kind of monitoring and building of files, but when like Anas al-Sharif was assassinated, the researchers were like, okay, we're going to figure this out. And what that looks like a lot of the time is something like, there's a guy in this unit who we, based on something he posted, we know he was in like the Netzarim corridor on this date. And then we can like cross-reference that date with, a massacre was committed during that stretch of time. And then in order to find out who else was there, you can go through like his Instagram, find who his friends are. Are they in the same unit? Are they friends with all the same people? Some like things like that. And through this kind of like sleuthing and open source research on timing and personnel, you can start to piece together a composite picture of, the structure of the IDF and who is operating where and what that unit's special role is. Like we discovered, Yunus Tarawi has this great little like, I think it's a documentary now about the Ghost Unit snipers. And that was, cobbled together through very similar means. And so in terms of like combating, the Israeli misinformation, it's not hard because they're like when Hind Rajab was murdered, they were just like, oh, we didn't do that. That was someone else. That someone else used a tank to shoot 365 bullets into this car. Right. Like, obviously that's a lie. And I think no one believes that, except like Zionist bots and vociferous racists, whatever. But it's much more powerful when you can put a face to it. You're like, no, that's the guy who did it. We know he was there. We know he was in this unit. We know that unit was operating on that day. And if you can pin the guy to the deed, then they have to not just say, oh, no, like no one was there. And if you say like, no, prove that guy didn't do it. Because we have all this evidence now. And tell us how the evidence is incorrect, if it's indeed a lie. that I think cuts down
Yeah.
on their bullshit a bit.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really powerful. We talked in a previous episode, totally unrelated to this, but we've talked in a previous episode about how, let's say like the left, a lot of the times we're talking about systemic failure or like systems wide problems. We're critiquing systems. But a lot of the times I think like that sometimes obscures that there are individuals actually doing this, making choices to carry out genocide, to oppress, to enact violence, all of this kind of thing. And so, I just think there's a lot of power in doing, not just on the narrative front, but I think there's a lot of power in this efforts at justice and accountability that is about like, naming the people who are doing this. And so it's not just the Israeli government or something like that.
And also like with like shipping, right?
Yeah.
People in the PYM are doing like incredible work around shipping and like getting victories every day. And it's unbelievable to watch. But one thing that happens often is you close down a port and they go to a different port. One thing that can happen is you put an IDF soldier in jail.
Right.
He's in jail. He's just there. He's not going anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Right. He's ineffective now.
Yes,
he's
exactly.
rendered ineffective. And exactly. I have maybe one more question, which is, let's talk about some of the cases that are top of mind right now that you want to talk about, or maybe some of the victories that you'd like to talk about that HRF has got.
Yeah. So the biggest two that come to mind always are, I've already talked about them, but it's the one in Brussels and the one in Brazil. And they're important for similar reasons. But what I think both of them show is that, as I said earlier, like the law is very, very clear. And in filing these cases in many jurisdictions across the world, and always it's just a request for prosecution. Because again, like sometimes we will get messages of like, Hind Rajab Foundation is going to arrest this person. It's like, no, prosecutors can do that. States can do that.
Right.
And we need states to act. And that's all we can do as an organization is make these requests for states to just do what they're supposed to be doing. And in Belgium, the way it like went down is someone spotted I believe it was Golani Brigade flag at this festival. We said, okay, who are those guys? Found them, put together the file, sent it to the authorities, and then they were at the festival, putting in like a show of force. Arresting these guys, taking them away, interrogating them, and then of course we talked about they punted it. But that was like that was a huge victory because it was an acknowledgement that like the law was very clear, that just the request with the crimes, the same way we've been doing it everywhere in the world, it's an example that like you can just use your police to go get these guys. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, you're obligated to do it. And they did it. And
you're using the police to get some guys who were like doing graffiti, or whatever.
Right,
like,
how about let's go get them for genocide?
Right.
And that they did it under like very explicitly under universal jurisdiction is already itself a signal that they think these guys are enemies of all mankind, which they are. And same thing in Brazil, where they did it under as like the Belgians did under domestic law. They launched an investigation, the guy was spirited away. But that spiriting away is also very important. And that's happened in a few other places as well. It happened in Cyprus, I think, Sri Lanka, because I think, as I said earlier, like one of the goals, the ultimate goal is to get each one of these guys arrested, put in prison or on trial. But one of the other goals is to make the world feel very small for Israelis. Like, obviously, we want them to leave Palestine, but also we don't want them to feel comfortable leaving Palestine. We want them to be looking over their shoulders everywhere. We want them to feel like the pariahs that they are becoming. We want them to feel like the criminals that they are becoming. That is something that can like really open up a lot of political space internationally and also in countries themselves, where if you make them feel like criminals and they then, unfortunately, this is how it works. We're using this kind of dynamic for good this time. If you make them feel like criminals and you treat them like criminals, people will start seeing them as criminals. And that can have, major political consequences, both domestically and internationally. And that's a snowballing effect. And so, we haven't had anyone brought to trial yet. I think, fingers crossed, I think we will this year or soon. But the chase and the way it's making Israelis feel and the way it's making people understand what is possible and what they can demand from their governments. I think those are big wins.
I wonder if you have thoughts about like how legal organizations can increase the pressure on like the international community to take action. How can other lawyers and legal professionals get involved from where they are? Or, yeah, are there ways for people to get involved in this work?
Yeah. First, I would say there's everyone who has the capacity to do this work should be doing this work.
Yeah.
Every other legal organization, let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Yeah.
There's so many guys. We got to get them all. So as
Yeah.
many people as there are, please go get them. Two, the way the work proceeds is you need lawyers on the ground in whatever jurisdiction you're working in, right?
Yeah.
You know, like we depend on this growing network of legal professionals around the world, both to volunteer with us to just help the work, but also in various jurisdictions. So like building up those relationships, both with us, with any other organization that's doing it, and just internal to your country of like getting groups of interested lawyers together to share knowledge about how to do war crimes prosecutions. It's not something that really comes up in a lot of in a domestic court a lot. And so people need to start building the institutional knowledge for that. And, you know, with it also comes like issues of like immunity, things like that. One thing that doesn't come up with it, which is very important, sorry, I just want to briefly mention this, is the statute of limitations.
Okay.
There just isn't for the crime of genocide.
Okay.
So as long as these guys are alive, they can be prosecuted. They can be prosecuted. They are criminals, which is the other thing to say that, like, you know, the genocide is ongoing and it gets worse every day. And there's like an incredible sense of urgency to this because you want to do anything that's within your capability to help bring it to an end and to take these monsters out of Gaza.
Yeah.
But it's also like, this work will go on for as long as we can do it, and certainly for as long as they're alive.
Yeah.
Because, you know, hopefully one day when Palestine is free, like, these guys will be around the world. And we should go get them then too.
Yeah. And they should know it.
And they should know it.
Right.
Exactly. They should know that for as long as they live, they will be chased. And, you know, that getting that ball rolling now is very important, and like building up the institutional knowledge, building up the like political connections necessary to push courts to do these things, or prosecutors to bring these charges, and also people in the legislature and the executive to promote this. Building up those structures is extremely important. Back to more concrete stuff, how can people help us? Yeah, volunteer. We always need legal professionals, and also like very much need researchers. Yeah. You can donate money. That is always helpful. Yeah. And then the other thing is, because this depends on political will, again, like the law is clear. It is just a matter of, will the prosecutor bring it? Do they have the political will to do it? That depends on people like being in the streets and pressuring wherever they are, pressuring their government to fulfill its international legal obligations.
I'm wondering if part of the strategy has anything to do with like state sovereignty as well, because like the spiriting away is like not just a, you know, an issue of like, okay, they're taking them out of these countries and like, you know, that's bad. It's also like a question of the sovereignty of each individual country to, you know, prosecute to have a say over how their citizens act within the world. Is that part of the strategy as well? Yeah. Like the conversation around sovereignty? And is it something that you're talking about within like the countries where cases have already, you know, escaped the grasps of, you know, whatever justice looks like?
I mean, it's definitely like a part of the strategy, because again, like international law is articulated by and enforced by states. And to the extent that states can't enforce them, they are some piece of their sovereignty. Like one of the fundamental sovereign prerogatives of having a justice system is being rendered moot. And I think they owe it to their own citizens, as if we like think of the role of the sovereign as protecting its citizens and being able to exercise the right of exclusion, then I think everyone owes it to its citizens not to allow these motherfucking genocidaires to walk among you. It's like not only just like a moral injury, but in many cases, it is an actual physical injury. If you're 22 years old and you've just gotten off of 3 years from waving a gun at everyone who is inferior to you, which is everyone who is around you, who's not your fellow soldier, you're going to take that with you when you leave. And there's, of course, like a racial dynamic to it. It's no accident that they are causing problems mainly in Latin America and Southeast Asia. But it's also like they feel like they can do whatever they want. They feel like gods when they're in a checkpoint. They have control over it. They feel like gods when they're in Gaza. They have the power of life and death. And you don't want those people around you. And it is absolutely the sovereign prerogative, but also I think responsibility to keep them out, or to the extent that they enter, to put them away. And it is also like, going back to what we were talking about in terms of international law applying to everyone. The fact that it doesn't is also a violation of sovereignty, right?
Yeah.
That the U.S. can bomb Yemen, or the U.S. can operate drones in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Iraq, whatever, or Syria. The U.S. can just bomb Syria. There's parts of the world that are bombable as a matter of fact. Of course, not as a matter of law, but de facto, they are bombable. They've been rendered into bombable spaces. That is a violation of sovereignty. And it's one that if you were to really articulate your sovereignty robustly and you were to hold the people who were violating it responsible, might cease. Even if they're not the ones directly violating your sovereignty. If you say some things are unacceptable, we are going to announce ourselves as sovereigns to put an end to this practice, that might have ramifications down the line.
Can I actually ask one more question?
Yeah, please. Yeah, we can go all day.
Okay. You talk about criminality, criminals as criminals. I think that for some who hear this, there's almost like maybe like a bit of a bracing reaction because for so many you learn about making criminals feel like criminals as something that's like quite unjust and unfair, right?
Yeah.
Like the prison industrial complex as something that like is totally messed up, right? And a bad thing.
100%.
So yeah, can you talk about how criminalizing people who do genocide as something that actually is just and
I think you kind of, with genocidaires, right?
Yeah.
You have two things you can do because what we're talking about is the extermination of a people. And one of them is you can kill them. And that is happening on the battlefield. And, resistance to genocide is always justified and I hope they succeed.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do if you're not on the battlefield is you can find some way to take them out of commission in a different way. We're not talking about vigilante justice. We're talking about going around the world and killing people. We expressly do not advocate for that.
Again, the law as written.
Exactly.
Right.
We're not advocating for that at all.
Right.
We are proceeding through the courts through perfectly legal means, and that is all we are trying to do. But I do think that, I was very, kind of ironically, very inspired initially even to go to law school by Eichmann in Jerusalem. And Arendt has, for all her racism, et cetera, and all the problems with that book otherwise, she has that beautiful closing part where she's kind of like ventriloquizing what the judge should have said. And she puts the words in the mouth as, because you decided that you didn't want to share the world with a group of people, no one should have to share the world with you.
Yeah.
And like, if you have removed yourself from the human community and the humane reaction to that is to remove you in a way that preserves our own dignity as people. And so that doesn't mean the wholesale like slaughter. And again, it doesn't mean vigilante justice. It means working through the apparatuses that we have put together to, at least aspirationally, provide you with due process, treat you as a person, to then to remove you from the community. You cannot be a part of it. And I recognize that obviously, like the carceral system in the United States is itself a crime against humanity. We have set up various torture camps for poor people and minorities. No one's saying we should support the prison industrial complex in the United States. I do think that with international justice, things change a bit. It's not, policing in the United States is so much just like the maintenance of underclasses. And
it's the subjugation of classes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That is what the prisons are for. That is what the police are for. On the international level, that kind of subjugation proceeds through things like the WTO and other stuff, and to a much, much lesser extent, the international criminal system. But it's not this like constant presence of subjugation, this constant presence of putting people into underclasses via prison to continue to generate the class relations that exist.
Right.
In fact, the opposite is true, which is that you have international class relations that exist in the world system that exist through legal mechanisms like free trade agreements and things like that. And also, as we see constantly, just brute force. And what international law can do is actually subvert those. It is actually a way for, and again, this is why the Global South has long been the most robust defenders and authors of international law. It is a way to put a check on that power and actually use this kind of like carcerality and this criminalization as a way to reverse those class relations or to start clawing back some kind of modicum of power in a world system that looks like it is dominated by blind domination. Because blind domination is the way in which increasingly the United States and Israel and countries around the world are going to start enforcing those class relations.
Right.
and making sure they persist.
Mm-hmm.
So, I understand like people's queasiness with criminalization and with this idea of criminalization as this expressive content about the individual, because of course it's used almost exclusively for evil here in the United States.
Right.
But it's just, I think it's just a different context.
Yeah.
In which you can't be importing the carceral relations within the United States into international law stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it also is like it's a different expression or like dynamic of criminality where the United States or like penal codes in the United States, it's about prosecuting an individual often for like individualized crime, right? Harm against one other person, this kind of thing. But crimes against humanity, crimes that make up a genocide, it's crimes against people as people, right?
It's against the idea of a people.
Right,
such,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And our, like you said, our human dignity itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to posit something that like, obviously disagree if you want, but like, I think also part of it when we're talking about the law as the law is like, if the law is the law and it's not just a tool of, bald-faced domination, then it can and should apply to everyone equally, right? And that is very clearly within the US system not the case. And then, because like if that was the case, then we could disagree about what the law is.
Right.
But that's not even what we're talking about, because the law is not an equal, just application to everyone for everything.
Right.
On the international level, it's the same, especially how you're describing it, right? If the law is never applied to the global north, then the law isn't just the law.
Right.
The law is a tool of domination. And this is breaking down that dichotomy and instead like utilizing it for, its most high-minded purpose of an equalizing force.
Yeah.
Because again, it's like, if you cannot equally apply the law, then you cannot talk about it as like a neutral.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Very clearly like a tool for one.
Right.
Exactly.
That was my 2 cents.
Thank you, Soraya.
That's 100%.
Yes.
We agree.
Amazing.
But I think it's an important part of the conversation if we're trying to think about the carceral state in general, because like usually when people have that like feeling about the carceral state,
people have this like abolition instinct, right? Like even the worst crimes we must not put people in prison for, right? But I think that's but
also it's about the like specific aberration within the American context.
Yes.
Abolition is the first step, so we can start from zero. It's not that we don't owe each other within a legal context, like an agreement, a contract amongst people. It is that there's no like picking apart within the American context.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like in some ways you have like the international system has a little bit more clarity and it requires an equal application now.
Well, it's also that if you think about this not as international law as like the international community as the subject, but international law as a thing where the subjects are states, then it's from below that we're articulating it. And it's not, let's think of like the US as the avatar of subjugation, both internally but also on the international scale. And if we analogize again to a personal scale, it would be like the underclasses of the world are taking control of law to use it against their oppressors. And there's no analogous thing in the US except the subjugated people of this country seizing the organs of the state. And that looks like revolution. So there's this, back to the Rob Knox article that I was talking to you about earlier. He quotes Zizek, of all people, as saying there are certain demands that if made at the right moment and like pursued like very uncompromisingly are themselves revolutionary, even if their content itself is not a revolution. It's the demand itself, like only a revolution could really bring it about. And I think the demand and it's a very simple one, and it's one that everyone pays lip service to, the demand that international law apply to the powerful states as well as the weak is in itself a revolutionary demand if you pursue it to its end, because pursuing it to its end means that you have a new world order. You have a new world system in which the United States is not on top and can't boss everyone around and kill with impunity and shield Israel from accountability. You have one in which the poor people of the world, who are geographically separated, are now able to have some kind of modicum of self-determination because they aren't abused anymore. And that really is like the promise of international law. And if it were to fulfill its promise, it would create the rule of law for the first time on an international scale, but also create a new world. And a new world is fundamentally what's necessary, because we're still in the old world, and the old world is the world of colonial genocide, and we keep seeing them, and they're not going to stop until we get a new one.
Cours vite, camarade. Run fast, comrade. The old world's right behind you. Jake Romm from the Hind Rajab Foundation, thank you so much for being here with us
Thank
today.
you guys so much for having me.
Appreciate it. Popular Cradle is made in partnership with the Palestinian Youth Movement. Thank you to the many people who contributed to the making of this episode. Our editor is Soraya Shockley. Our artwork is by Shenbi G and Vivek Venkatraman. Our theme music is composed by Salma Talib and performed by Clarissa Bitar and Hisham Jarmakani. Follow, like, and subscribe to us on social media at Popular Cradle. That's YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram at Popular Cradle.